Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News Hour, India's voice to the world. I'm Preeti Kaur. Coming up in the next 1 hour, US blocks UN Security Council resolution vote put forward by the UAE for humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. 13 of the Council's 15 members voted in favor of ceasefire, while Britain abstained. Tensions mount in South America as Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro unveils new map to include disputed territory of the oil-rich Esequibo with Guyana. IOC clears some Russian athletes to compete in Paris 2024 Olympics as neutrals. Approval limited to individual sports, no team entries permitted. The United States on Friday vetoed a proposed United Nations Security Council demand for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the conflict between Israel and terrorist group Hamas in Gaza. 4 earlier drafts presented since the war broke out were rejected by the Security Council. 13 other members voted in favor of a brief draft resolution put forward by the United Arab Emirates, while Britain abstained. The US had offered substantial amendments to the draft, including a condemnation of the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks that killed 1,200 Israeli people and in which 240 people were taken hostage. Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
13 UN Security Council members voted yes, the United Kingdom abstained, and the United States vetoed the vote. The United Arab Emirates, who tabled the resolution, which was co-sponsored by more than 90 UN member states, says it's extremely disappointed and that it will redouble its efforts to call for a ceasefire. The US Deputy Ambassador to the UN, Robert Wood, says while it supports durable peace, it cannot support calls for an immediate ceasefire. This, he says, because Hamas has no desire for peace or to see a two-state solution. The vote on Friday here in New York comes after Antonio Guterres deployed a rarely used Article 99 of the UN Charter, calling to the attention of the Council any matter which in his opinion may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. The Palestinian permanent observer Riyad Mansour says this is a sad day and that it will not stop calling for a ceasefire and to stop the killing of Palestinian people. Mansour says millions of Palestinian lives hang in the balance. Every single one of them, he says, is sacred and worth saving. Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan did not address the Security Council after the vote, but in a statement said that a ceasefire will be possible only with the return of all the hostages and the destruction of Hamas. Meanwhile, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, the UN's humanitarian wing in Gaza, has written to the President of the UN General Assembly to inform him that the organization's ability to continue delivering its mandate in Gaza has now become very limited. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has told Council members here in New York that the eyes of the world and the eyes of history are watching, demanding that the international community do everything possible to end the ordeal of the people of Gaza. Jody Jacobs at the United Nations in New York, reporting for DD India.
The Biden administration has asked Congress to approve the sale of 45,000 shells for Israel's Merkava tanks for use in its operations against Hamas in Gaza. The potential sale, worth more than $500 million, is not part of Biden's $110.5 million supplemental request that includes funding for Ukraine and Israel. It is under informal review by the Senate Foreign Relations and the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee. The move would allow Israel to prepare for contingencies given the high tensions in the region, one of the U.S. officials said. More than 70 U.S. lawmakers on Friday demanded the governing boards of 3 of the country's top universities remove their presidents. Lawmakers cited dissatisfaction with their testimony at a hearing about anti-Semitism on their campuses. In the letter, Republican Representative Elise Stefanik and Democratic Representative Jard Moskowitz demanded that the Board of Governors at the Harvard University, University of Pennsylvania, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology oust their presidents or risk committing an act of complicity in their anti-Semitic position. Penn President Liz McGill, Harvard President Claudine Gay, and MIT President Sally Kornbluth, who all testified before a U.S. House of Representatives committee on Tuesday, have come under fire from their schools' Jewish communities for their handling of clashes between pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian contingents since Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. Calls for McGill's and Gay's resignations in particular have mounted in the days since their testimony, during which they declined to give a definitive yes or no as an answer to Stefanik's question of whether calling for the genocide of Jews would violate their school's code of conduct regarding bullying and harassment. It was signed by 71 Republicans and 3 Democrats. The European Union has announced that it will increase humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in 2024. The EU's executive said the funding will provide support both in Gaza and in the West Bank in face of mounting humanitarian crisis. Alex Cadier gets us details from Brussels.
The European Commission will provide €125 million in humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in 2024. The new funding represents a more than 20% increase on the amount provided this year. The Commission said this was an initial pledge, implying that more money may be made available to support Palestinian civilians later in the year. Since Hamas's October 7th attack in Israel and following Israel's military response, the European Union has quadrupled aid to Gaza and the West Bank, from €25 million planned for last year to a total of €103 million. The funding, which the EU will spend on direct aid deliveries and likely funnel through other aid agencies, will be used to provide humanitarian support. Early in the conflict, the EU drew criticism when one of its commissioners, Oliver Varelli, said he would suspend all development funding to Palestine pending a review, a move later overturned by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The European Union remains the largest provider of humanitarian aid to Gaza and the West Bank, but where consensus is more difficult to find is on the bloc's position regarding political solutions to this conflict. On Monday, the EU's foreign ministers will gather here in Brussels to discuss possible plans to sanction Hamas's financial sources and consider whether or not to sanction extremist Israeli settlers in the West Bank. For now, the EU has not called for a ceasefire in this conflict. Despite the political differences, the EU is clear that it will continue to provide aid to Palestinian civilians for the long term. Alex Cadier in Brussels, reporting for DD India.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Friday that he would run for president again in the 2024 presidential election. Putin has already served as president for longer than any other ruler of Russia since Joseph Stalin, beating even Leonid Brezhnev's 18-year tenure. The announcement was made as Putin was decorating participants of Russia's military operation in Ukraine. Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow with more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has confirmed that he will run for his 5th presidential term. Putin broke the news at an award ceremony at the Kremlin, saying he had, quote, different thoughts at different times, but he understood that there was no other way but to run again. The announcement is no surprise, and experts say the way it was made likely indicates what the presidential campaign will appeal to. The approval ratings are high and many politicians welcome the news. Valentina Matviyenko, the chairperson of the Federation Council, said that the Russian society was united like never before around Putin's government. The election is set for the 17th of March and will last 3 days. The so-called new territories of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions will also participate in the voting. The question now is what other candidates will participate in the race. State Duma parties are yet to announce their candidates. The opposition, jailed or abroad, urged Russians to vote for any other candidate than the incumbent president. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said he was certain that the electoral campaign will come under outside pressure, but noted that Putin, at the head of Russia, started the process of tectonic shifts in all aspects of global life. Dasha Chernyshova, reporting in Moscow for DD India.
All right, let's get to updates on Russia-Ukraine conflict now. A meeting of the International Coalition for the Return of Deported Ukrainian Children was held in Kyiv on Friday. 72 representatives of different countries and international organizations participated in the meeting. In the meeting, Ukraine said the arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin and country's Children's Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia by the International Criminal Court facilitated the process of their returning home. Ukrainian Human Rights Commissioner Dmytro Lyubinets expressed hope that new warrant arrests would follow, stressing that many more Russia's representatives were involved in deportations.
After 2 arrest warrants were issued by the International Criminal Court for Putin and Lvova-Belova, it became easier to return the children. You can see the results, they emerged. We want International Criminal Court not to stop issuing arrest warrants. Not just these 2 people took part in deportation of Ukrainian children. According to our information, many representatives of the Russian Federation did it and keep doing it.
The Ukrainian Parliament approved 3 bills necessary to start European Union accession talks on Friday, including one on national minorities' rights. President Volodymyr Zelensky described the bills as a key step in Ukraine's application to join the 27-member EU.
Today, the Ukrainian Parliament has adopted the necessary laws in line with the European Commission's recommendations in the fields of anti-corruption and national minority rights. The conclusions of the Venice Commission, specifically regarding national communities, have been taken into account. We expect that Ukraine's efforts will be duly appreciated by the leaders of the European Union and that the corresponding European promises to Ukraine will be fulfilled.
Ukraine's Environmental Protection and Natural Resources Russian Strelets said that 1/3 of the country is mine territory, which is 170,000 square kilometers of total size of Ukraine. Strelets added the country is taking measures to speed up the demining process.
We have a huge mine territory. Today, the mine territory of Ukraine is more than 170 thousand square kilometers. So and the government of Ukraine is do everything which is possible to speed up the process of demining the territory, because we can't speak about restoration of our wild nature, about our environmental, without demining the territory.
Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro unveiled on Friday a new map of Venezuela, which shows the disputed territory of Esequibo amid growing border tensions between Guyana and the country. Tensions escalated over the weekend when voters in Venezuela rejected the ICJ's jurisdiction and backed the creation of a new Venezuelan state in a referendum. Guyana has questioned the vote's legitimacy, put its armed forces on high alert, and said that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is disregarding ICJ orders about taking no action to change the status quo in Esequibo.
Let's see where on the map we will celebrate tonight. Long live the complete map of Venezuela. Long live the homeland. Long live all the Venezuela.
The U.S. has announced joint flight drills with Guyana following an increase in tensions with Guyana's neighbor, Venezuela. It comes amid a border dispute over the Esequibo region, an oil-producing area claimed by both the countries as their own. DD India's Latin American correspondent, Marie-Trini Mena, has this report from Caracas.
The United States has expressed its support to Guyana, a move that is further complicating the dispute with neighboring Venezuela. This week, the U.S. Embassy in Georgetown announced flight drills to oversee military operations in Central and South America. Venezuelan officials say it's a provocation, while another neighbor, Brazil, has called for a peaceful resolution. Earlier this week, Venezuela also sent military personnel to an area close to the Esequibo territory that is mostly an isolated jungle. Last weekend, Venezuela held a referendum that approved the creation of a new Venezuelan state within the disputed area. Just days after the vote, President Nicolas Maduro ordered state companies to exploit oil and gas in the Esequibo region, and also ordered the National Assembly to create a law to prohibit Guyana from granting permission to take oil in that territory. Guyana has reported Maduro's comments to the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, which is in charge of the dispute. Venezuela, however, does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Court, saying the judges are biased. The long-running territorial dispute began over a century ago, when the borders between the former British colony Guyana and Venezuela were demarcated. The area in question is larger than Greece and accounts for about 2/3 of the country of Guyana. Both Guyana and Venezuela claim ownership of the region. The border dispute has gained importance in the last decade after the government of Guyana approved the extraction of oil in the claimed area. Analysts say that amid the Venezuelan government's low popularity, President Maduro is using the Esequibo issue to achieve national cohesion around the government. Venezuela issued arrest warrants against 14 people linked to the opposition, accusing them of treason and participating in a transnational conspiracy related to the Esequibo. Maritrini Mena in Caracas, reporting for DD India.
Up next, a short break on DD India, but after the break, we tell you US President Joe Biden begins a 3-day mega fundraising trip in California, even as his son faces new criminal charges over tax evasion. Stay with us to get the details. Unfazed by international criticism, North Korea determined to launch more spy satellites in the near future. EU moves towards becoming the first major world power to enact laws governing artificial intelligence.
We just don't bring you the news as it unfolds. We get to the heart of the matter.
We don't just present facts. We demystify complex social, political and economic events.
We break stories that shape the world's present and future because you deserve the truth.
I am Tanvi Taneja from New Delhi.
I'm Ollie Barrett from London.
I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C.
Join us on DD India Global Monday to Friday at these times.
Welcome back after the break. You're watching DD India News Hour. Let's get you more international updates. US President Joe Biden has kicked off a 3-day mega fundraising trip in California. Now it's happening just after the Department of Justice has filed new criminal charges against his son Hunter over tax evasion in the state. But for the president, California holds the promise of the deep-pocketed entertainment industry. Caroline Malone gets us the details.
Well, the timing isn't great for US President Joe Biden. He's travelled to Nevada, then on to Los Angeles and Santa Monica in California in the hope of convincing the rich and famous to get behind his campaign. On Thursday, though, new criminal charges were put up against his son Hunter for tax evasion in the same state, part of a long-running probe that could distract from his father's work. Well, nonetheless, a top Biden campaign official has boasted that this trip will rake in a record amount of cash for the Democrats' presumptive candidate for president. Well, California is home to many rich and famous people, including members of the entertainment industry, who Democrats often get major funding from. But earlier this year, there was also a long-running actors and screenwriters strike over pay. That took months to resolve, and it could impact fundraising. But that's not going to stop the Biden campaign from going all out. One event they are hosting is being held by Steven Spielberg and Shonda Rhimes, with Lenny Kravitz due to perform. And tickets are ranging from thousands to hundreds of thousands of US dollars. Caroline Malone in Washington for DD India.
Let's get you updates from the Korean Peninsula. Now, North Korea is determined to launch more spy satellites in the near future to collect information on the military activities of its enemies, state media KCNA said on Saturday. The satellites will be modeled after the Malekyong-1 satellite that Pyongyang launched in November, which governments in the United States, South Korea and Japan said violated the UN Security Council resolutions. North Korea has been criticized over its ties with Russia by South Korea, Japan and the US, who say Pyongyang is providing arms support to Moscow in return for help in advancing its military capabilities. The United States, South Korea and Japan have agreed on new initiatives to respond to North Korea's threats in cyberspace, including satellite launches and cryptocurrency abuses. The national security advisors of the United States, South Korea and Japan met in Seoul on Saturday as Pyongyang warned that it would deploy more spy satellites. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the meeting followed up on commitments set forth at the Camp David Trilateral Summit hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden in August, where leaders of the three allies pledged to deepen security and economic cooperation.
We're increasing our trilateral defense cooperation, including sharing missile warning data in real time. We've also launched new trilateral initiatives to counter the threats posed by the DPRK, from its cybercrime and cryptocurrency money laundering to its reckless space and ballistic missile tests. When it comes to the DPRK, we are keeping our eye on the ball because it continues to represent a threat to international peace and security and to regional peace and security.
A French court convicted 6 teenagers in connection with the 2020 beheading of history teacher Samuel Paty, whose murder shocked the country. The court found 6 teenagers guilty of lying about the content of a classroom debate that sparked anger at the teacher, who showed students caricatures of Prophet Muhammad during a discussion about free expression. Among those on trial was a teenage girl who had allegedly told her parents that Paty had asked Muslim pupils to leave the room before showing the caricatures. Paty was killed and decapitated outside of a school in Paris suburb on October 16, 2020. A team of British officials is in Delhi for the latest round of talks on a trade deal between India and the UK. DD India London correspondent Oli Barat gets us the details.
The British media is reporting renewed momentum in talks on a multi-million-dollar trade agreement between London and Delhi. The 13th round of talks this is between the two sides. From a British perspective, the government of Rishi Sunak would like to deliver a deal before the next general election, which needs to take place at some point in the next 13 months. It's reported that issues to be discussed in these negotiations include things like lower tariffs for British goods in India, such as cars and whiskey, and faster processing for Indian companies to send workers to the UK. The UK government believes a deal would need to be reached by the end of February, before India's election, and London would paint it as an example of a post-Brexit victory, given that the European Union hasn't been able to reach a free trade deal with India. A spokesperson for the UK's Department of Business and Trade said, going into the talks, the UK and India continue to work towards an ambitious trade deal that works for both countries. Oli Barrett in London, reporting for DD India.
Europe on Friday reached a provisional deal on landmark European Union rules governing the use of artificial intelligence, including governments' use of AI in biometric surveillance and how to regulate AI systems such as ChatGPT. The two sides are set to hash out details in the coming days, which could change the shape of the final legislation. Here's a detailed report.
With the political agreement, the European Union moves toward becoming the first major world power to enact laws governing artificial intelligence. Friday's deal between European Union countries and European Parliament members came after nearly 15 hours of negotiations that followed an almost 24-hour debate the previous day. The two sides are set to hash out details in the coming days, which could change the shape of the final legislation. The accord requires foundation models such as ChatGPT and general-purpose AI systems, GPAI, to comply with transparency obligations before they are put on the market. These include drawing up technical documentation, complying with EU copyright law, and disseminating detailed summaries about the content used for training. Governments can only use real-time biometric surveillance in public spaces in cases of certain crimes. The agreement bans cognitive behavioral manipulation. Consumers would have the right to launch complaints and receive meaningful explanations while fines for violations. Business group Digital Europe criticized the rules as yet another burden for companies on top of other recent legislation.
Professor Daniel Wood serves as an assistant professor in the program in Media Arts and Sciences and holds a joint appointment in the Department of Aeronautics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Professor Wood serves at MIT as the faculty lead for African and diaspora studies. DD India correspondent Vinod Kumar spoke to her at COP28. Let's listen in.
Hi, we are here at COP28 Dubai. With me is Daniel Wood, professor at MIT in the United States of America. She's here to showcase how satellite data and satellite intelligence can be used to mitigate climate change in the world. Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
What brings you here at COP28?
I want to share the news that there's a lot of free and commercially available data that's vital to our work in addressing climate change. We can use satellites to observe what's happening in the oceans, with our forests and vegetation, our crops. We can even monitor greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. Can you delve in a little bit deeper of what kind of the technologies that we can use in doing this mitigation?
There's new commercially available data, especially in the methane space, that's coming online now, and plenty of government data, for example, from the United States and from Europe, and some of that data is freely available. But there is a lot of work that's needed using both cloud computing, sometimes artificial intelligence, to help make these large data sets available for policymakers so they can track what's happening with climate change and climate mitigation.
India and the United States of America is collaborating in a project called NISAR, synthetic aperture radar. So how do you think that the data from this satellite is going to help in climate change mitigation?
I'm very excited about the NASA-Israel cooperation. Synthetic aperture radar is a great technology where a satellite orbits the Earth. It sends a radio signal from space down to Earth, helps us measure what's happening with soil moisture. I'm working, for example, on a project in Africa, in the country of Angola, and we need high-resolution data about soil moisture, such as you're going to get from NISAR. This will help us understand who's impacted by floods and droughts.
As COP28 enters its second week, over 800 signatories and counting from a broad spectrum of society joined the forces to call on Sultan Al Jaber and all parties to deliver a 1.5 degrees Celsius aligned outcome in response to the global stock take, because later is too late. Amid the second week of COP28, a powerful coalition comprising of more than 800 signatories representing diverse sectors such as business, finance, philanthropy, politics, academia and civil society have united in a resounding call for decisive climate action. In a letter addressed to President Sultan Al Jaber on Friday, these signatories underscored the critical nature of the moment, emphasizing that as COP28 nears its conclusion, the world stands at a tipping point. The president of Boeing Middle East, Turkey and Africa, Kuljeet Ghataora, has outlined a promising outlook for the aviation industry's environmental initiatives at the ongoing COP28 summit. Speaking at COP28, he emphasized the global commitment to transforming aviation into a green and sustainable sector. Anticipating a significant year marked by progress in environmental and climate initiatives, Ghataora underscored the industry's growth trajectory propelled by an increasing emphasis on sustainability. Boeing's dedication to climate, environmental responsibility and human well-being was reiterated by Ghataora, with a focus on transitioning to sustainable aviation fuel to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Acknowledging aviation sector's role in global carbon dioxide emissions, he emphasized the industry's commitment to addressing environmental concerns.
We have been very consistent at Boeing. We believe that sustainable aviation fuel is the near and long-term way for the industry to abate the carbon footprint in aviation. The industry knows that it's got to address those issues, and it went out with a commitment, from an industry commitment, to get to net zero by 2050. So the industry is really aligned around the fact that SAF is the solution, and it will really go a long way to helping the industry reach that net zero goal by 2050.
Cuba published a list of foreign nationals and entities it accuses of involvement with terrorism. The list, published in the country's National Gazette, identifies 61 people and 20 entities for alleged involvement in promoting and planning acts of terrorism. It includes influencers, many long-time dissidents who reside in the United States, and a candidate for mayor of Florida's Miami-Dade County. The list comes just days after an annual US government report said Cuba grants safe harbor to the terrorists. The United States on Friday slapped sanctions on dozens of people over human rights abuses, including Iranian officers it accused of being involved in the targeting of US officials. The US Treasury and State Department imposed sanctions and visa restrictions on 37 people in 13 countries in action coordinated with Britain and Canada. Americans who engaged in certain transactions with them also risk being hit with the sanctions. Washington also targeted people in Liberia, South Sudan, Uganda, and Central African Republic. The newly elected president of Guatemala, Bernardo Arevalo, angrily rejected a legal maneuver by the prosecution to invalidate his election triumph, calling the effort an attempted coup. The US and other Western countries have backed Arevalo, saying the probes are a coordinated effort to undermine him and democracy in Guatemala. Earlier, the Attorney General's office had declared it would attempt to annul the results of the first round of election, citing irregularities in voter registrations as well as data collected the day of the June vote. But the head of Guatemala's top electoral court said it would not hold a repeat of the election. Australia's southeast sweated through a heat wave on Saturday. The nation's weather forecaster predicted a maximum temperature of 40 degrees Celsius, which is almost 15 degrees above the average December high for the city. The heat wave raised the risk of bushfires and led the authorities to ban fires in large parts of New South Wales state. People cooled off in the water at Sydney's Coogee Beach in the sweltering heat. The beach patrols monitored beachgoers for sun safety and hydration. The authorities urged the public to stay safe. Meanwhile, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said that it is time that we look after each other and stay safe.
Today, with the high heat levels, I do say that it's a time to ensure that we look after each other and stay safe. Climate change is a threat to people's health as well as to our environment, and we need to acknowledge there's a need for a comprehensive response.
The Embassy of India in Nepal, in collaboration with Lumbini Development Trust and the Lumbini Buddhist University, organized the inaugural India-Nepal Cultural Festival in Nepal's Lumbini on Friday.